It's another history in the United States. They call that part of United States where the Baptist where the Baptist works, the New England, because they came from England and they are English people, so they call it now New England, but it's the United States. Yeah, they say that today about 3/4 of all Baptists in the world are found in the USA. Yeah. 3/4. So it's only 1/4 in the rest of the world. And they call them, and they were also one of this time of rejection and persecution. That's why they grew so much. But it was also one of rejection and persecution that they experienced there in the USA. Roger Williams, he came from Boston, 1631. Now it's back to because we are now going to
what's Quakers?
The Quakers, we will just talk about them. They have some values of simple lifestyle, community, stewardship, things like that. They challenge normal life.
Okay.
And they like services of meditation. They call it's a group, but they're also Baptist. But they call themselves the Quakers, but they are different than the rest. There were some divisions. You will see here from Roger Williams, 1631. He was banished and he started in Massachusetts and the separation of church. And he believed in the separation of the church and the state. He established a church system there supported by the state. No room for dissidents such as Baptists and Quakers. They didn't give place for them, but that was now the general being understanding of church, and the Baptists and the Quakers was. Okay, then 1636, Roger Williams founded the Rhode Island colony for the Israel. He was there in 1639 that some Baptists formed a church in Providence. Probably the first in America, 1639. English. We did the English.
Yes, now we are American.
Now we go back to the States, to the United States part. So I think the important date is year 1639. So they start in the USA as it is now. Some Baptists formed a church in Providence, probably the first in America. Although persecuted, the Baptists increased in number and spread to the New England colonies. I mean, increase and persecute, dit gaan saam.
Yeah.
I mean, together.
That's Book of Acts is clear on that as well.
In comparison with other Christian Congregationalists, Anglicans, Presbyterians, the number of Baptists was small in the USA. It was with the spiritual movement, that great awakening, that started that big growth, so that they grew rapid and so on. And then 1726, it was with the preaching, the Great Awakening, the Great Awakening of the USA. Great Awakening. So you can now see the difference of this awakening and the awakening there was 1770.
Yes.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. So the awakening in America was earlier.
Yeah, it started earlier, but it went on for longer. You will see just now. The Dutch Reverend Preacher Gilbert Tennant, the young Presbyterian minister, 1735, for powerful awakening in Northampton. So he's still there in the awakening, Massachusetts, under the preaching of scholarly congregational pastor Jonathan Edwards. Most influential of all was the extraordinary preaching of Anglican George Whitefield. Now that's a number.
Yeah, I know Whitefield, yeah.
So we can write down George Whitefield here. he was a very enthusiastic preacher. They threw him with everything, but he just continued preaching. And 1740 was the peak. Was the peak of the just give you some idea. The Baptists were the greatest beneficiaries of the Great Awakening. So the most Christians went to the Baptist church in the Awakening. On noticing how many of the converts became Baptists, look at what said Whitefield. My chickens have turned to ducks. Because they went into the water. My chickens turned to ducks. I don't like the word my, in any case. It's not ours. The number of Baptist churches throughout the colonies rose dramatically in the generation after the revival. Now, from 96 to in 1740 to 475 in 1780. This growth of the church is led by outstanding preachers as Sabal Stearns and Daniel Marshall. Also names I've heard, but not so often. There were inevitably some excess associated with the revivals, which tended to split the Christian community, critics, supporters, and supporters of the movement. Some was, I like this word movement, because I think Christianity is a movement. It works through, it's a movement. It can't be a fixed structure. It's a movement. It expands, it's moving, and it's changing the world. And it's going from me to you, to you, to you. It's moving between us. And it's the Spirit moving through us outwardly. And it is not always the same. Because needs from time to time also differs. So I love the word movement, but that's me. I don't say. Baptists too split into the regular and the separate churches. As soon as something started to be fixed, immediately you get splits. The regular Baptists were comprised chiefly town people and those of better education. And immediately with a better education, you see what happens, and I want to stress this also. It's also through a lot of research. If you are a leader, you have a structure. You see, we are a pastor. We follow the pastor. We follow the leader instead of God sometimes. But that leader don't have all the gifts. You only have some of it. Yes, strong ideas about things and things that work for him. So what happens? He's preaching it. He's living it. And the people who like him come to him. So at the end, nearly all the structured congregations had some gift that they put in front. But if you look at places where things grow, is where all the gifts are functioning. And now you have the educated ones in the city with some gifts, maybe of training, and some of the other gifts, but they don't have all the gifts. And the likewise people go to them, the people who like that. And now the others started with another gift because they don't find it there. And they are at that gift. So they go separate. And that's the real bad thing about congregation.
It still happens like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It still happens. It's true.
The doctrine oaks will hang out together, and the oaks into healing will hang out together.
And you go to the place where you are comfortable. Because
yes.
You don't go to places where you're not comfortable. So he attracts the same people
People, exactly. So it's educated people. You will attract. You know, the more educated people, and it's actually.
It's not
I can
supposed to
say
be
it in
that
so
way.
many words. It's wrong.
That is wrong. It's not an organism anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hartseer.
Yeah. Very,
It's
yeah.
really, what's
It's
the
sad.
answer?
Sad.
It's really sad.
Sure.
Because, and people don't see. So, and this is the same thing, that's how we know things separate.
Yes.
Soon, you who need to enrich them, and they enrich you, separate. Because you need all the gifts. I will talk about the gifts in practice basics today. It's really important to understand some of those gifts and things.
Ja, dat is baie verwarring om dit.
And that
Bias. It causes major splits.
So, yeah,
I enjoy that. Because I'm stuck in
remember
that.
this because we forget this thing. We need to remember this thing. It's very important that we learn through the history also. And some grew faster, had in fire and fervor of the Whitefield revival. Later on, many regular and separate Baptist churches united again, luckily. The latter part of the 18th century into the 19th century, American churches experienced a number of revivals. The Great Revival was at the end. And later on, we had the Great Revival.
The Great Revival.
Now, this is another one because that revivals and the awakenings there died down, and then in 1800 also was the Great Revival. And that was just for the Great Revival. It's not very well organized, but 18 to 1803 gave a further impulse to Baptist growth. In the period leading up to the American Revolution, 1776, around here, the USA, put it 1776, USA at this revolution. Now, we're going to talk about this quite a bit. Because they influenced a lot the Baptist Church. That's where the Northern and Southern Baptists separated. Independence from British were the forefront of the struggle for complete religious liberty, separation of church and state, with the Constitution of the independent United States of America was adopted. It included no religious state clause. That means that the government cannot influence the churches. They functioned separately. Was the first of modern states to experiment with the novel idea of completely separating church and state, allowing full religious liberty and providing no state support for religion. See, even in Germany today, the state is still paying the churches.
The churches. Which probably helps for them. I mean,
Part of your tax.
But I mean,
it's one part of your tax that you are giving is going to the church. Baptists played a major role in bringing about revolutionary policy. Now, the revolutionary policy, and we can say a lot about the Declaration of Independence of the USA on Christian basis. If you look through that thing, it's biblical. It's amazing how much this influenced the world. Much more than we thought. That's more because if you live from a faith basis of love, truth, and biblical value systems, the whole system functions. Somebody gave, I'm just going a bit off, detour a little bit, but it's a nice story. There's an article written by an Indian theologian, Mangawali. Dr. Mangawali, he wrote this article. He was looking at that big earthquake in Haiti, and he saw 200,000 people died in Port-au-Prince. Port-au-Prince had 1 million people, more or less, the city, and a fifth of the city died in that earthquake, and it was 7.5, I think, if I remember correctly, on the Richter scale. So now, he compared it with the earthquake in California. The same type of earthquake, the same way of going, and in California was 5 million people. And 36 people died.
Yo.
So he asked the question, why? And I can't go into all the details. But it goes like, in California, with the Declaration of Independence, the way people think of truth, etc. The consequence of that was that 99.8% of all buildings was built according to the rules.
Yeah. And this is
When you look at modern terms, where everything is running on bribes, it means that when they investigated, 99.6 something percent of the houses was not built, and when the earthquake came, they just tumbled down. And people died. Your faith have consequences in your social life. So don't underestimate the influence that the church, or put it this way, children of God can have in writing the politics of a country and the way that the country functions. The Christian engineers and the people understanding science, the way that they constructed everything on a Christian belief system.
Or worldview, whatever you want to
And where the universities teach them that way. But now in the modern USA,
Now you don't have that.
they took God out of the system.
Right.
So now what is happening, there's about 5,000 to 6,000 engineers going into jobs in the USA without
Basic.
They try to uphold a certain value system, but the value system is hollowed and they have a foundation. So any greed or any attack on that system makes it tumble. What is happening here and in the faith of people, they are connected. And people don't see, they are blind. And the church needs to show the world, if you go on blind, you're going the wrong way. There is light for business, for economics, for politics. There's light. And we need to bring the light into it. That's why we need Christian artists and Christian politics, Christian people in the politics and everywhere. We need to form a new
foundation.
So the church's job is to influence the politicians, the artisans, and everyone.
But there's a bit of a paradox around that, because I've been thinking around the same stuff. Because also, according to Bible prophecy, it's very clear that these things are going to eventually fall apart. And I've always been battling with the idea that, okay, Lord, if it's going to fall apart, then what is my duty then? I mean, and that's why I understand where the Calvinist is coming from. But I also know that that's not the right, because people still need to know the truth.
Yeah.
So I have this idea of, I still fight. We as Christians must still fight to get there. Yeah. Irrespective of what the prophecy, we know that
we are sent to fight.
We are sent to fight, exactly.
Here. That's our whole purpose. We do that in missions. You will see. It's so important.
Okay, so
we are here to change culture and systems and break down that's wrong.
Yes.
And we're not doing it.
Even though God said it's going to fall anyway, it's going to fall apart anyway.
Yeah.
It's kind of a paradox. It's interesting.
Because millions of people go sleep hungry because there's not a faith crisis.
Yes.
You can draw the line.
It's about bringing people to Christ. It's about that's the end goal. Is people need to know the truth and they need to come to the Father. And that's what it's about.
And teach them to obey.
And teach them to obey.
Then the systems change. Okay. We need to hurry a little bit.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I think that's also important to think of. And then the membership was 720,000, 9,385 churches, 6,000 ministers, and so on. And then starts the Calvinistic Armenian understanding of grace, the tensions. I don't have to explain that. I think you know what's Armenian.
Yeah.
We've done that in the Awakening. Edward Whitefield, with Calvinist theology prevailed among the majority of Baptist churches. Some smaller bodies, however, such as the Free Will Baptist, espoused vigorous Arminianism. Okay. Wide impact, and then came in 1883 the Baptist, the William Miller. He predicted that Christ would return 1843, and still people are predicting.
They still believe it. He's still returning. It didn't come yet.
When the date failed, he changed the date to 1844. The history is repeating itself so many times. Don't fall into the same mistake.
Yeah.
The failure, and he's so convinced. I mean, he will give his life for him. That was his William Miller. The revised date resulted in widespread disillusionment and the decline in his spiritual vigor. That's so amazing that he can use that word here for many congregations. It's not just in how many members there are and how good they believe in systems, but their vigor for Christ died because of things like this. Okay, then landmarkism. That means I'm right and you're wrong. Idea became very in the Baptist church also, argued that Baptist policy was taught in the New Testament and therefore only Baptist churches could be regarded as true churches. And that also is so devastating. So devastating. And that's why it's so good to read in the book that that's not the belief of the church. They restricted the administration of the Lord's Supper to members to the local church only up to today. And you can argue this was administered in a properly constituted, ordered Baptist church. Needless to say, they opposed the practice of pulpit affiliation, where you go to preach in another pulpit. So they didn't share their gifts. That's what that means. If you don't share, and you get on with your gifts only. Although landmark principles have been influenced in Baptist circles, they have never become the official position of the larger Baptist denominations. So landmarkism actually died down in a big way, luckily. And then slavery and so. That's what now. That's where the North and the South in America divided. 1861. 1861, slavery. The issue is slavery in the USA. But we know the history. What happened there? The violent and bloody conflict, the history of the Civil War, 61 to 65.
The grays and the blues.
And yes, the Christians was deeply divided. Those who were industrial North argued that slavery was incompatible with Christianity. You cannot allow to have slaves. While the South was losing from their agriculture, they lived and worked with slaves, and they didn't want to give it up. They said, no, slavery, you can have slaves. And then saw as the arrogant interference of others. If you come and tell me that I don't need to have a slave, yes, told the North, you are arrogant to interfere with our businesses. Because, you know...
How was the treating of the slaves, though? See, that's the defining factor.
You always find people who treated their slaves good, but there was a lot that
treated
was treated very badly. So so it's not only that. That is also a factor, but it's not only that. And they say they are arrogant. They cannot tell us what to do. So divided the Baptists into the two major bodies, the Northern Baptists and Southern Baptists.
Okay, so that's where the Northern and the Southern Baptists.
Yes, now it's two different sides of the
Civil War. So that was basically the Civil War split into North and South. Yeah,
yes,
it makes sense. It clearly makes sense. Yes,
and it's sad that at the end, after the war, they decided to stay separate.
It's still separate.
You see what happens, and that's also very important to know, and I experienced it in Mozambique also. The rural people always feel a bit inferior to the city people. So you, like in Mozambique, they will tell you, we are the barefoot pastors, they are the pastors with the shiny shoes and the jackets. They won't listen to us. We are nothing. Look in the history, it's very important, inferior complex. People think, because many times because of what you're materialistic, how much you have, and other value systems that came into the world that's not supposed to be there. There's people think that they are nothing. And then it's difficult to associate with the ones with the jackets and the shiny shoes.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And you find it everywhere. And it's also, I need to convince the rural people when they're going into the city, it's not you who gives the message, it's the Lord. And it's not your position, it's His. In any case, your position is much better than you think. And who you are, to start knowing, yes, you are nothing. And you're not capable of anything. But the one inside you,
exactly,
is going to use you.
The one you identify.
Don't be afraid, go. It's a very important message. You learn it through the history. In any case, so the Southerners, it was a struggle for freedom against tyranny. The war claimed 600,000 lives. And in those times, that's, I mean, there were not so much people in the world. More than 1 million casualties could have been so routinely baptized in piety. It was terrible. Left the South economically and socially devastated. And they decided in 1845 to remain separate from the Northern Baptists after the war. Maintain their education and missionary enterprises. But now, and they don't have enough resources to continue with the awakening. We remember they started with mission work. Now it was very difficult.
Sorry, just a quick one. Did the North and the South have different theological stands, obviously, as well?
On slavery.
On slavery.
And
So it was only basically slavery and righteousness.
Yes.
That was their difference.
That was the
Okay.
rest of 100%.
So that makes sense. Okay.
And now we can learn how things. Now you can go and you can investigate there. How did the church divide? Why? How can one issue divide a whole church? That 99 issues and they believe the same. How can one of the issues divide the church? The Dutch Reformed and the Reformed church, they divided because they didn't, they couldn't agree on the songs to sing in the church. So anyway, so one of the surprising developments in the post-war period was the remarkable growth of the Southern Baptist Convention to become the largest Baptist association in the world. In that suffering, the Southern Baptists really grew. Not in materialistic things, but in people. And if you have people, things happen. Okay, and and the 1900 they came to more or less their peak. It's the peak of the USA. Not so much the northern part, but in the southern part. That's why the Southern Baptists are so strong today. The Southerners was a struggle for freedom. Yeah, okay. Finish with that one. Okay, the largest Protestant denomination in the country, starting off as a church of the poor and often illiterate. You see, that's the rural people. Developed an impressive array of institutions. Just 1902, you can read there, 36 Baptist colleges, universities with 12,000 students, 7 theological seminaries, 1,000 students, 29 colleges for women with a combined student body of 400,000 institutions, learning of African and Native Americans with 5,000 students, 64 preparatory schools, academics with 12,000 students, so we can continue. Altogether, grand total 169 educational institutions like schools with more than 54,000 students. Okay, and then comes the time of modernism and the fundamentalism, the issue that we touched on last time also, the corrosive acids of modernity. With the Darwin evolution,
That was a problem.
somebody gave me this little picture of that time. Can help. It's like when the church was confronted with Darwinism. It's like the ostrich put his head in the soil. They didn't want to see it. They kept quiet. And ideas have consequences. So keeping quiet also had the big consequence of the church dividing.
Yeah, that's true.
You will see now in this history.
And it takes wisdom, I mean, when to actually say something, when not to say something. But you can't say nothing, and you also can't say too much.
So now that people started looking at the church who's saying nothing, you don't have a standpoint. And some people will say they are not spiritual anymore. And the other people will say, you didn't accept Darwinism and the science. And then you get the separation at the end of spiritual and what's
Secular?
secular.
Secular.
Put it like that. It's a great divide between
The two.
sacred and secular.
Yeah.
Sacred and secular, the secular. So now they say, no politics, no arts, nothing in the church.
That's it.
Because those things are the world now. You don't believe in the Bible, they are bad. And the church say we are spiritual. And we do spiritual things. We need to pray and we need to preach and do Bible studies. That's our job. We have to evangelize. Politics and all those things are for the world and they are bad. And they separated what should have been together. Because you can't have politics if you don't have faith underneath it. The politics and you can't have spiritual life without a life from Monday to Saturday.
I know it's something that Spurgeon fought with a lot in him. It took such a toll on him, fighting atheism and Darwinism at the time. He actually got quite ill, as far as I know.
God took the whole world with its politics and its arts, all the people, from Monday to Saturday, not only Sunday. And He wants a relationship through the week with everything. If you are a politician, you are a Christian politician in the first place. And God needs to be in the politics, otherwise it will be chaos. God needs to be in the science, otherwise you have chaos.
And he's there.
But now the churches and the thinking of people are separate. The secular divide is killing us. Now people think church is on Sunday. But church is in the week. On Sunday we rest a little bit and be encouraged.
Yeah.
But what we do is on Monday to Saturday. That's where we are church. That's where we are in the whole community, influencing the world. Not on Sunday. On Sunday we rest. The hard work is from Monday to Saturday. In the politics and in the arts and in the hospital and in the school, wherever you are witnessing and you are working and you are church there. Because you are the church, not the building in any case. So the church is spread, is intermingled in the whole community. That's what the church is there everywhere. If I ask somebody in Mozambique, where's the church on Monday? They say, oh, there's no meeting, there's no church. That's the way we think.
Yeah.
But on Monday, the church are there in the whole community. On Sunday, we just come back and we rest a little. Now you've got liberalism and you've got fundamentalism. And that's what the history tells us.
Yeah.
Because the way of the reality of God, if you take that out of the science, it's totally messed. And when you take the reality of God actually and His working in the world out of the church,
It's also nothing.
also, we need both. More acceptable to the modern scientifically trained mind. They accepted only those things that are more acceptable. They believe more in miracles. And only the things that they could explain in the Bible, they say this is what happened, and the others are only stories. You get all those things we know about them. Emphasizing inerrancy of the Scripture, deity of Christ, the virgin birth, substitutory nature of atoning death, the bodily resurrection. All of these things they say is not true. The imminent and the personal return to the earth, those things. So the fundamentalist and the liberalist. So there's a lot of splits came into the church. The Baptists divided. The Southern Baptist Convention was initially less affected, but later on, but they are more conservative than the northern ones. Towards the end of the 20s, however, there were those within the SBC who received that unsound theological views were making dangerous inroads in the denomination, especially with the theological seminaries, as is happening today.
Say again?
As is happening today.
What's
a
happening
strong
today?
concern that all those ideas going into the seminaries.
Yeah.
A strong conservative drive was initiated to remove the positions of influence from those liberal theologians, and that caused a lot of ill feelings and withdrawals. And it really didn't do the church very good. This has not prevented them, however, from experiencing ongoing growth in the Southern Baptists and exercising considerable influence in the life of millions of American people. Very interesting. But yeah, the church that fight is still on.
No, I don't think it's ever going to stop until He comes back.
Or when there's another awakening.
Yes.
And
Which I think is coming.
We can see in the history of Canada. There was one man who was really deep touched by things and said, this cannot be like this. And he said, the church don't have the zeal that it needs to have. And he started preaching, and the Great Awakening started. So, I mean, that's what we can pray and work for. Or we can just throw our hands in the air and go and stop. That's so. And I believe we can. The Lord wants to do something.
All these questions about secular and spiritual. You know where I learned that it's one. I went back to the Jews.
Yes, it's one.
I went back to the Jews and I looked at what they believed around these things. And to a Jew, spiritual, secular, it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Your job is spiritual.
Your life.
Your life is spiritual. Everything is spiritual.
Testimony. Your business is a witness.
Yes.
Go everywhere.
Your body is a witness of Christ.
How can you live without your word being part of it? I mean,
Exactly.
you also need to see through research, and that's why Alan Hirsch, as he also known, read his books if you're very interested in this.
Alan?
Hirsch.
How do you spell that surname?
It's a German Hirsch.
Yes.
I will mention his name again with the basics. It's interestingly how the things come together. So we've done the British part of the history. Now we do the USA part of the history. So you can see more or less
what happened exactly.
The Civil War and things influenced them.
But especially the modern